Hello, U.S. history class. All right. So today we're going to start the second lesson in Unit 9 about imperialism, and more specifically American imperialism. So the age of imperialism in the 1800s was an age where empires, especially empires like the UK, like Great Britain, the British Empire, they had this problem. When we talk about Britain specifically, what's their geographic problem? Well, the geographic problem is that they're an island nation, and they don't have a lot of resources. So they have to expand out if they want to keep the machine running. The United States was able to last a really long time, and pretty well into their Industrial Revolution without having to spread past their own borders. And like we learned yesterday, and what you'll read in the documents, it was kind of an accident. Not an accident, but the way that the president talks about it, that these former colonies of the Spanish Empire fell into the lap of the United States. And then the question came, well, should we be imperial anyway? Because of the fact that we have great natural resources. We have Texas oil, we have Pennsylvania steel, we have coal mines, and for a long time we were pretty self-sustaining in that aspect. But now we're going to see a few things happen. The frontier is closed. There's no more west to go. And the idea that there's a new place to go where you could escape it all and have absolute freedom is a very American idea. And when they announced the closing of the frontier, which meant people spread to California and the only place else west to go is the Pacific, there was a sadness in the American spirit, because it felt that there was no more blow-off valve for social tension. There was no more to run to, no more space to run to, and that's where a lot of people point to this. Well, we expanded sea to shining sea, and now we have to spill out over our own borders into this sort of, even if it's not a natural resource, physical natural resource, it's a social natural resource. Where else can Americans go to experience that sense of absolute freedom that really sort of doesn't exist today, because everywhere is colonized, is conquered already today. It's all the land is taken up. So after the Spanish-American War, after Roosevelt charges up San Juan Hill, becomes famous for that, you have this question of, should we be an imperial nation or not? Should we expand and take colonies past our borders for the greater good of the nation, and maybe arguably the greater good of the world? We do things pretty successfully. We're going to come and show you how to do things pretty successfully in terms of economics and democracy, and we'll form a relationship and help each other out. On paper it makes sense. In paper it makes sense. So, what is imperialism? Well, imperialism is when a stronger nation, now I'm going to use this ego here, a stronger nation takes a weaker nation under its wing. What does it mean to take somebody under your wing, or to take, that expression, take somebody or something under your wing? Well, it means under your protection, to show them the way. Maybe it's like a bigger brother or something, or somebody you look up to takes you under their wing. It's an expression people use. Another way to define imperialism is when a stronger nation takes advantage of a weaker nation and exploits them for natural resources or whatever it is. Like in history, there are multiple truths running at the same time. So both of these examples are correct. There's a positive and a negative way, and when we start looking at history in terms of, good guys and bad guys, superheroes and supervillains, we kind of miss the point. A lot of times even the person doing the thing we consider wrong thinks that they're doing the thing that's right. So what is imperialism? When a stronger country takes advantage of a weaker country to exploit its natural resources, or when a stronger nation takes a weaker nation under its wing to kind of form a union and join forces. So, in your opinion, are there benefits to imperialism? Are there benefits? If you look at somewhere like Hong Kong today, if If you look at somewhere like the United States, a place that was imperialized, those places, some of the benefits that they've reaped are all of the things that come with Western civilization, modern capitalism, the idea of natural rights, the idea of separation of power, that idea of democracy. These are things that rub off when you become imperialized by a Western nation. And even if the people experiencing the imperialism often don't like it, aren't in favor of it, they are left down the line with certain things that put them ahead of the places that weren't imperialized. They learned to read, they learned to speak, English or Spanish or whatever the predominant language is. With that said, the downsides, obviously. Under the Spanish Empire, there were downsides like you were forced to be Catholic. If you weren't Catholic, it was convert or die. That was called the Inquisition. So obvious downsides. So what we're going to look at here is the two arguments that emerged during this time. Some of the big voices on the side of imperialism, people like Teddy Roosevelt, people like President McKinley, some of the big opposition voices to imperialism, anti-imperialist voices are, surprisingly, Andrew Carnegie, the captain of industry, the big robber baron. Also, Mark Twain, great American thinker, great American writer. He's kind of like the Hunter Thompson of his day. We'll learn about Hunter Thompson later on. But these are big personalities, big, strong influence, and they all exist in this same time period, in this pressure cooker of the 1898, me and Grosso were talking. There's a documentary called Crucible of Empire. Crucible is sort of like a melting, churning, bubbling chamber that things are forged in, forged in the fire. And the empire that's forged here is the American Empire, and the reason why they call it a crucible, it's really this time where America melts down and gets re-solidified as something brand new. All right, so was American imperialism justified? There are a lot of other questions we could ask. Why did America become imperialist? Another way we could go with this is what was the debate over American imperialism? But was it justified? That's the question we're going to try to answer. All right. This is a political cartoon that you should examine. You guys, maybe we should go back to this. I don't know. We're all learning. By the way, I'm not wearing the same clothes as yesterday. I'm recording this on the same day. So, hopefully in my next video, or I'm going to say in my next video, I will be wearing something different because I'm not doing another one today. All right. So, really important cartoon. The main characters you can identify, obviously, Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam. What's the setting? Setting is a classroom, right? And how does he look? He looks stern. He's banging the stick on the table, and the students, look scared. It says school begins. And who are the students? Well, there's so much in here. Me and Grosso could go down a rabbit hole with this. He's texting me right now, and I'm seeing it pop up. And, I'm just thinking, this is one we always go down the rabbit hole. But over here, we have the old class. Then how do we know that? They're older. They look more well-behaved just in the fact that they're sitting up straight and they're reading their books. And what are the labels we have here? I'll pull this up. This is a really important political cartoon. California, Texas, New Mexico, Alaska, Arizona. And what do all of these places have in common? Well, they're all in the West. So they're not part of the original colonies. These are all places that got taken over as the United States expanded. And they learned the lesson Uncle Sam is teaching them. What is that lesson? Liberty and justice for all. It says here, the United States must govern its territories with or without their consent until they can govern themselves. So basically saying, whether you like it or not, mommy and daddy are going to hold your hand. Daddy being Uncle Sam and mommy being Columbia, I guess, are going to hold your hand until you can do it yourself, until you can walk. This is the older class, and they're learning to read. They're reading. Those are the places that now became states, but were territories. We have the younger class down here. And what are the labels on the younger class? Well, it's all of those territories that the United States acquired after the Spanish-American War. We have Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, Philippines. How many of these territories are either part of the United States now or still fall under the dominion of the United States? Well, Cuba, no. Puerto Rico, yes, U.S. territory. That's a U.S. territory. Hawaii, U.S. state. Philippines, no. So 2 out of 4 here. And if you notice certain things, like Puerto Rico is spelled a little different, that's because of the time period. The artist might not have known the actual spelling or didn't speak Spanish or whatever, so they kind of sounded it out. Now, really interesting. Look in the back here. Look in the background. You have 2 characters. You have this guy here sitting with the book, and obviously, again, these political cartoons was really stereotypical imagery that we would not accept today, but he is a Native American. And how does his book look? Well, he's been there as long as these students, so he has a book. He's in the back of class, but he's separate. He's separated, and it's upside down. I'm trying to see what I can, the book being upside down symbolizes that he really can't read. He's cold. He has a blanket. So, and he's looking at them kind of like jealous. So even though he's still part of that class of students, he's separate. He never was really incorporated. And it's somebody peeking in the door, looking to get in on the action. There's a stereotypical image of a Chinese person. China was always the prize for commerce. That was one of the arguments to get closer to China, to get the islands of the Philippines and Hawaii, to get out in the Pacific. The Pacific was the new area. And Roosevelt, being the controversial historical figure that he is, has said stuff like, China, the Pacific is the doorway to Asia, to China. The country that rules the Pacific rules the world, and that is the United States is going to rule the Pacific. So they really made an effort, and China is looking in the door, And one last character. Sad. You have the character over here, which represents the African Americans, And through all of this, you have the classroom, and you have on the desk it says, the Constitution and government of the United States. Uncle Sam teaching these territories, and what's the role of African Americans in all this? Where they're still, in their same, because this is this is after Reconstruction failed, but well before civil rights. They're still in their same position of just being the help, and this is the way that the artist views this. Now, these political cartoons are designed to inspire you and to reveal something. So when you see these, you got to understand the artist is not in favor of the African American's role here as simply washing the window. The artist is trying to reveal a truth through using humor and exaggerated imagery. The artist is against what's going on in this picture and everybody's different role, but they paint it this way in order to draw up an emotion, to get you excited, to get you mad. And what is it used when they use art for politics to stir up emotion and make up somebody's mind? Propaganda. Again, propaganda can be used for good or bad. It's not, just because it's called propaganda, but this is an example of propaganda. All right. So, after the Spanish-American War, the United States has Puerto Rico, 1898. You have, one second, guys. All right. Puerto Rico, 1898. You have Midway Island, 1867, a little earlier. Wake Island, 1898. Guam, 1898. We still have Guam as a territory that's part of the United States. Philippine Islands ceded from Spain, $20 million, 1898. 1899, American Samoa, still a territory today. You have Jarvis Island, 1857, a little before that. Just look at this map. Hawaii is annexed. They make a deal with the government, the royalty of Hawaii, and come in and take that island and incorporate it later on, becoming a state in the 1940s, 50s. But all of these territories in that very small period of time between like 1870 but 18 and 1900, but 1898 is the year that the United States, in one swoop, by knocking out the Spanish Empire, like McKinley said, all of these territories fall in the lap of the United States. So, causes of American imperialism. First of all, we have the term here when a stronger country dominates a weaker country, socially, politically, economically. New markets. What's a market? So, Amazon is a market. Obviously, the supermarket is a market, but when your sales are not good, you want to find new people to sell to. And new markets are one of those options. We have goods in the United States, like I said. Our problem at this time wasn't natural resources. It was somewhere to sell our natural resources. We had the gold. We had the steel. We had the coal. We needed somewhere to sell. Hopefully I'm yelling loud enough, but I just realized I don't have my mic on. We needed somewhere to sell. So one of the places that we wanted to sell, like I said, China, the East, to us it was the East or whatever, but surplus goods, growing sugar in Hawaii to sell to Western markets. That's one example. We're taking our coal, our timber, and selling it to Eastern markets. Raw materials, natural resources, like I said, yes, the sugar in Hawaii, but China being the goal is to get there and get them as a trade partner. Naval bases. World War II starts, our entrance into World War II starts with the bombing of Pearl Harbor, a place that nobody really knew about before they bombed it. I mean, Americans didn't know. They heard Pearl Harbor was bombed, and they said, what's Pearl Harbor? Why should I care? And then you tell them, well, over 2,500 Americans are dead. Then they cared. But when they first heard the name Pearl Harbor, Americans didn't necessarily know what it was. But it was a naval base right between, let's go back to this map. You have Hawaiian Islands. It's a naval base right between Asia and North America. It's perfect for defense. And that's why the United States Midway Island is a big battle in World War II. They form a chain, a blockade on these islands. Those islands are perfect for defense. And that's what gets Japan later on uncomfortable, because we're messing around in their backyard. You know what I mean? And the United States doesn't feel comfortable when the shoe is on the other foot, when people are messing around in the Caribbean, in the Cold War. All right, naval bases. Also, this idea of the white man's burden. You guys learned about this in Global. Now, the white part here isn't incorrect, but it makes it a little hard to grasp in terms of modern, because this question today isn't just white. This question is what we would call developed and undeveloped. So today we might call this the Western burden or the American burden. The idea that we have a responsibility to go and help places out that are in need. And, we are a rich country and we need to take that money and go help people, build them roads and build them schools. It's our responsibility to do these things. And we get mad at ourselves if we don't. That's the white man's burden. But our country isn't predominantly white anymore. Our government isn't predominantly white anymore. So a better way to understand what the white man's burden is, I think, is to think of it as the American burden or the Western burden, because it's this idea that because we are more advanced in our heads, because we have more in terms of wealth and resources, we have a responsibility to go and help places, help people in need, help countries that are struggling, help refugees. We have a responsibility because we can. The problem is, even today, when you go and help somebody and you have the resources, you often want to dictate the terms of that help. For example, I watched a documentary, talking about when people go into countries like in Africa or in Southeast Asia, and they want to build roads and bridges and stuff like that. And a lot of people volunteer through the Red Cross and through, what's the other one? You volunteer and you go over the Peace Corps. And it's great. you feel like you have a responsibility to do it because you have more money or you have more education or whatever it is. The problem is a lot of times when they go over there, what they end up doing is everybody volunteers. I volunteer to build the roads. So a company comes in and volunteers to build the roads. We volunteer to work on it. You volunteer trucks and you volunteer everything. It's so much volunteer that you kill the economy. There are people over there that would build the road if you hired them. There are people everywhere that would work on the bridge or the electric or whatever if you hired them, but you're not hiring them, so you're putting the whole neighborhood out of work, all these trades and stuff. So that's one of the problems today, that where the white man's burden or this American burden still exists today, where we feel that, hey, it's our money. If we're going to use it, we want to make sure it's spent well in helping you. We don't want some local politician or some gangster to embezzle that money. So we want to make sure it's actually put to good use. Also, we have a higher standard of building things and safety regulations. So we want to make sure things are safe and things like that. It's understandable. There's no right answer. There are multiple truths running simultaneous to each other in all of this stuff. So I'm just giving you the modern perspective on how you can understand the white man's burden without looking at it as purely black and white, because today it still exists and it's not black and white anymore. It's rich country, poor country today. All right. So this is another important cartoon. Examine this maybe on your own time and identify some of these characters. Obviously, we see Uncle Sam today. I don't know. Uncle Sam again here, wearing some kind of American flag leotard. But, he's holding up very stereotypical images of all the countries that, we just have in our dominion now. And what does it mean to hold somebody up? Same exact idea. Quote by TR, right? Congressional Record, not TR. All right, Congress. The Pacific is our ocean, and the Pacific is the ocean of the commerce of the future. The power that rules the Pacific, therefore, is the power that rules the world. And with the Philippines, that power is and will forever be the American Republic. So, what policy is supported by this quote? What's the policy we're talking about? This whole lesson, it's a policy of imperialism. It's saying, look, the power that controls the Pacific is the power that controls the world. And can we give that power up? The Spanish are weak today, but they may not be weak tomorrow. And these island nations can't fight off the Spanish Empire. Or what if, the English want to swoop in, or the French or the Germans start building up? We're going to leave them open. They're so valuable and they're so vulnerable. It's our responsibility, because we are the good guys, to stay around and protect, And again, I just want you to understand the mentality. It's not a Dr. Evil mentality, and that's what is dangerous. If you consider imperialism a bad idea, some of the most dangerous times in history are bad ideas in the hands of good people. These people have good intentions, but there's a lot of things at stake. All right, complete this in your notes. It's a little drawback. If this was in yesterday's notes, do it then. If it's in today's notes, do it today. Foreign policy. Foreign policy means how you decide as a president or a nation to interact with other countries. Are you going to be isolationist? So these are some of the policies. Are you going to be isolationist, which means keeping to yourself? We shouldn't get involved in other countries. Let them take care of themselves. Trump is sort of an isolationist president in a way, or an America First isolationist, where he's saying, look, why are we around the world spending all this money? We need to get that money back, pull the troops out of here, pull the troops out of there. And a lot of Americans feel that way. We should focus again on the United States. Let people deal with their stuff. We need to stop messing around. So obviously, this is a different time period. We're not isolationist. Here we feel we should get out there in the world and help people. And also put the United States ahead of the game by gaining markets and resources in the process. Roosevelt. So think back to the Monroe Doctrine. President James Monroe way back said, no more European influence in the Western Hemisphere, and the United States will stay out of the affairs of Europe. This is the isolationist policy. What's ironic is Roosevelt takes that isolationist policy and adds on to it with his corollary. I used to get tongue twisted on that word. It just means addition, the Roosevelt addition. So he takes this isolationist policy of Europe stay out of here and we stay out of Europe, and he turns it around and makes it an imperialist policy. And this is what he says. Now follow his logic here because it makes sense. If the United States, I'm looking at a map, that's why I looked up here, you can't see it. If the United States is going to make sure Europe stays out of Latin America, make sure Europe stays out of the Western Hemisphere, right? Just like every other law, if somebody presses you, you have to enforce that law. So who's going to enforce it? Well, the United States, since it's our doctrine. What does that look like in practice? Well, what that looks like in practice is what Roosevelt says. Is it here? The U.S. will act as a police power of the Western Hemisphere. He literally puts us as the police of all of Latin America and all of the United States, and I guess Canada as well. Of the western side of the world, the United States will act as a police power. And the way that he seeks to enforce this, his policy is speak softly and carry a big stick. Now, we'll get to these guys after. This is more important. What does this mean? Well, speak softly and carry a big stick. What it means is you don't have to yell at people if you're holding a baseball bat. That's what it means. And that's Roosevelt's policy toward other countries. You know, if you have the big army, if you have the big navy, you don't have to make demands. People are just going to listen to you. You know, if they know that you have the muscle, people are just going to listen to you. Speak softly, but also carry a big stick, carry a weapon on you. And that's Roosevelt's policy when it comes to dealing with other nations. You know, all right. Later on, we're just previewing this. So this is important right now for imperialism. Later on, Taft, Woodrow Wilson will have dollar diplomacy, it's called. This means that if you make other countries economically dependent on the U.S., we give them foreign aid. This is a move that's criticized today. Instead of going into a nation and telling them this is the way stuff is done, blah, 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 you tell them we're going to give you money. Problem is, just like the kid away at college, if you start to fail, the money stops and and you're on your own. That's called dollar diplomacy. American investment in foreign countries will make them listen, not the big stick policy, but our money flow, you know? So these are two different ways to look at things. And finally, we're going to have moral diplomacy later on where they say, oh, we're going to help out countries that we find a moral equivalent in, you know? But the two important ones right now are Roosevelt's corollary, speak softly, carry a big stick, and dollar diplomacy. All right. So, political cartoon asks you to interpret. You could do that on the notes. What does it mean, speak softly and carry a big stick? I would ask you to look at this. Here it says Caribbean Sea. And look at the imagery and what different things mean here. And I want you guys to offer your interpretation of what is that going to look like in practice. Him saying, speak softly, carry a big stick. All right. U.S. involvement in Latin America. So, like I said, what is this going to look like in practice? The United States wants to build the Panama Canal. They want to have dominion over the Pacific, and they know that in order to get there, they need to have their shipping on the east, New York, Boston Harbor, whatever it is, be able to connect to the west, and going around South America is too much. So he's going to use his corollary to enforce the building of a canal, Panama Canal. There was a plan to build a canal through Nicaragua. Failed. Then they planned to build it through Colombia. The Colombians said, no dice. Roosevelt says, well, to do this, he finds the local rebels who are mad at their country, and he sponsors their revolution. He wins the revolution with them, and they establish the nation of Panama with the contract that the United States will be able to build a canal through it and hold that canal until 1990. And that's what they do. During this time, Cuba, we build Guantanamo Bay, which is still open in Cuba, with the Platt Amendment, authorizes the U.S. to intervene in Cuba to protect its interests. So what interests do we have on the island of Cuba? Well, the sugar plantations and the Americans that are in Cuba. If they're threatened, this treaty or this amendment that we sign with them says basically we can intervene whenever we want. Cuba can't make any treaties with any other nations that will compromise its independence. Panama, Teddy wants to build the canal, shorter passage to the Pacific. Colombia controls it. Once we sponsor the rebellion, I hate saying we, Teddy Roosevelt and the government back then sponsors the rebellion. The rebels form the nation of Panama with the United States' help, and we hold the canal until 1999, this says, 1999. All right. Panama Canal is one of the great feats of modern engineering. And I say modern, but really like 100 years ago. Think about that. 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, 120, maybe 110 years ago. The way it works is it has a series of locks. So you sail your boat into like this bathtub, and they fill it with water until you're above the wall. And then you sail in, and it closes. And then you're a little higher. And then they fill it with water. And then you go, and they walk you up the mountain, basically, one lock at a time, or one section at a time, and walk you back down to the Pacific Ocean. It's amazing. A lot of people died building this thing, mostly of malaria. There wasn't any malaria pills like there are today, malaria vaccines. People were, digging with pickaxes and shovels. And really, really a miraculous feat of engineering done in a really, really short span of time. And it's still open today. It's open for business. Cost about the price of a house to drive your boat, sail your boat, navigate your boat through this canal. Big, big money business. Panama controls the canal today. We handed it back over to them. Last one, I think. U.S. involvement in Asia. Like I said, this Spanish Empire was tremendous. It spanned the globe. And now the United States has control of it, or the question of what to do with it. So, U.S. involvement in Asia. The Philippines, we fought and beat the Spanish in the Philippines with the help of the local rebels who were already fighting them. After we left, they established their own government. Somebody forgot to tell the United States, or they didn't trust them to run the show, because it was the dominion of the Spanish Empire, and they thought, how could these rebels, who they saw as uncivilized and unfit for civilization, how could they run their own country? So then the idea was, well, we got to wrestle it away from them. People signed up for this war because the splendid little war in Cuba was nice and easy for the United States. But this one wasn't. This is a preview of the type of guerrilla warfare, the type of terrible war that we'll see later on in Southeast Asia, in World War II, and then in Vietnam. Jungle warfare. This is a 3-year knockdown, dragged out war that the United States fights against the Filipinos to, basically take control of their country. They were granted independence finally in 1947, but that's a long time after this. China is the prize for trade. The United States wants to trade with China, and this has to do with the whole spheres of influence. The United States wants to get their markets there, and wants to have that sphere of influence. Secretary of State, all right. I'm just reading pop-ups, sorry. Secretary of State requests an open door policy. The United States should open its doors to China. For those of you if you haven't watched it yet, this is before, or right in the midst of, the Chinese Exclusion Act. So we want to open trade with China, but we don't want to open immigration. We don't want to be friendly yet. I hate that. The United States did not want to be friendly yet with the people of China, just the business of China, selling things in China. If you can access on PBS, Learning Media, American Experience, the Chinese Exclusion Act. Really, really good. It's one of the only times in American history that a piece of congressional legislation was passed naming a group specifically, an ethnic group specifically, And there's no getting around what the Chinese Exclusion Act was designed to do. It's right in the title. Really embarrassing piece of American history, but really important to understand the resiliency of the Chinese people. And in that time, the excruciating time that they had to face. All right. Finally, exit pass, completed on your notes. 1, what led the U.S. on a path to imperialism? 2, was the U.S. justified to practice imperialism? So use this video, use your notes, use the documents that will accompany this. We're going to read some of what Mark Twain has to say about this. We're going to read some of what President McKinley has to say about this. Both really important voices. Hopefully we get to read some of what Roosevelt has to say about this. This is a really important turning point in American history, this whole story from yellow journalism to Teddy Roosevelt, age of imperialism, and then Roosevelt as president now, and how he takes it one step further from Roosevelt, the politician, charging up San Juan Hill. McKinley gets shot by a young anarchist. Roosevelt takes the chair, Roosevelt as president. All right, so like, subscribe on YouTube. If you have any questions, as always, please get at me as soon as possible. Hopefully I'm going to test the audio in the beginning of this video and it's fine, but forgot to put my headphones back on when I stepped away for a minute. All right, see you soon.